All right, so we're going to be calling this segment "Behind the Vault Door," and it's going to be a little more political. Put the kids away because there may be some language used here that's going to be a little bit more than PG-13. Obviously, this is an issue that's a very passionate one for a lot of people, and at times it may get a little feisty. So,
Fireside conversations.
Fireside conversations, right? And we're here with Brian, who's retired military, and definitely has some viewpoints that love to hear. Ask you a standardized question, something that I always ask people. If you could change anything about the Firearms Act, what would it be?
The classification system.
Yeah? Yeah,
for sure.
What are you thinking?
Well, it's illogical, and I'm a big fan of the states, and I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. I think those things are wonderful, but not everyone is, and that's fair. If people are afraid and they don't understand, and they're even philosophically opposed to martial skills and abilities and potential, that's fair, especially from a lot of people who don't understand it and have never lived it. Non-military people, civilians, and so on. So I do get it, and I understand it. And I like the Canadian system because I don't have a problem with licensing at all.
Me either.
I don't have a problem with training courses. I certainly don't have a problem with secure storage. Unless a firearm is being used, it needs to be locked away empty.
Yeah.
So that, children are safe, the uninitiated are safe. That's a very important thing. And that will cut down on a lot of the stupid accidents and the negligence and that kind of thing. However, once you've accepted that a person can take courses and be trusted and own a military rifle with a large caliber and a magazine, a detachable magazine or a belt or whatever, then whether that magazine holds 5 shots or 30 is irrelevant. Whether it has a 200-round belt attached to it is irrelevant. And whether it can fire 1 shot with a depression of the trigger, or whether you can burn through a 200-round belt in 20 seconds is irrelevant. You either trust people or you do not. And if you can argue that someone can own a converted automatic, which I despise the concept of
yeah.
Taking a firearm and changing its purpose to fit some civilian mindset of classification, the device was designed a certain way, it has a historical significance, and the reason why someone wants to own it and collect it is because of that historical significance and its operating parameters. So to take that away to fit some classification ideal doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm going to stop you right there because I'm a collector at heart. I always tell people that I'm like 2-part collector, 1-part shooter, because I find myself collecting more and shooting less, and to alter something from its original state and to damage it essentially, right? Like that's the way I see it. I mean, when you take something that has vast historical value and you suddenly have people welding things and cutting things and essentially changing the design, you've contaminated that originality that its value is derived from. So I mean, I get really pissed off when I see that. I get ticked off, and I'll echo your sentiments. As I'll tell you right now, if you're going to trust me with a firearm of any kind, whether it be a hunting rifle or a semi-automatic military-style rifle, whether it be a handgun or a long gun, if you can trust me, if I'm certified to have in my possession any kind of item that discharges ammunition of any kind, then you got to trust me with those types of items and just leave me alone. I mean, like you're essentially damaging the value of these things. I mean, this is my property. I want to own it. I want to collect it. There are other parts of the world that obviously have legal mechanisms in place where they certify people. I mean, I believe in various levels of certification, and I think that that's really going to be the solution to this. Is that rather than melting down Lugers and Thompsons and Browning bars from World War II, there should be something in place that allows people to be certified, to be vetted, to be to reach a level of clearance, and to have the ability to own these types of items unmolested. And that's really kind of a really strong feeling that I have, is that we really need to move in that direction where we find a way to certify people, to screen them carefully, to insist on certain security protocols to make sure that they have these things kept safely in their homes. I mean, there are other countries that have it. A lot of other G20 countries.
Sure. Yeah. New Zealand has an outstanding system that balances the need of public safety versus the right of individuals to own property and to enjoy their property and to celebrate history and to enjoy the privileges of living in a free society with rights and privileges and responsibilities. And there's been this huge move towards exonerating people of any responsibility, but then infantilizing them by taking away their ability to own property. And the problem is that the anti-gun people and the gun-ignorant people don't understand where that road leads, because I can make the same argument that no one needs to own a high-powered motorcycle that can do 300 kilometers an hour. I mean, no one needs to own that, and I don't care what argument anyone makes. I don't care what your argument is. You don't need to own it. And someone would say, well, but it has a secondary purpose of transportation. And I can say, yeah, but a fully automatic Thompson submachine gun has a secondary purpose of historical significance, or of certainly of financial value, but certainly there are martial skills that can be taught by mastering such a piece
Screw
of
that
equipment.
fun factor. How about fun factor?
Rights.
Right? I want to own something like that.
Rights are not about needs; they're about wants. And the fact of the matter is, no one should beg, cap in hand, from their government to have the right to own anything, because the government doesn't own us. We own the government. The government works for us. They are our employees. The Prime Minister of Canada works for me. The Minister of Justice and the Minister of Safety work for me.
I love your thought process.
I don't answer to them, and I am not beholden to them. I am a free man in a free country, and they take enough from me in my tax dollars and by the power I give them through my vote. But ultimately, they answer to me. And when they turn around and they get their cronies in the media to demonize me, and then they get their friends on the bench to create legislation that criminalizes me for my interests and my passions, simply because as a 17-year-old I decided to join the Army and serve my country for 20 years and gain an enjoyment out of the tools that I use to do that job. And the fact of the matter is many shooters today are ex-military, police, retired police, current serving military, and frankly, there are a lot of great civilians out there who've never done either, but really enjoy their passions, and they get it. They understand their responsibility. They get into the technical aspects of the firearms. They're responsible. And if you're looking at 99.5% of a group of people that comply with the law and are responsible and are completely safe in society and are enthusiastic patriots who are on all levels of the spectrum, of the political spectrum, left, right, center, all over the place, to disrespect them and take away their rights to treat them like vassals that have to answer to the state and be, indentured slaves.
This is why I like talking to you, man. I love it.
But seriously, we pay a lot of money in taxes in this country, and in a lot of circumstances, we don't get to say what happens to that money. And then they turn around and they say, well, by the way, you own 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 firearms that you can't enjoy. You can't take them to the club because we came up with an obscure little rule that says they have to sit in a locker until you die.
It's ridiculous.
For no reason.
Yeah.
And they don't operate any differently than 10 dozen other firearms that are out there on the firing line. But you can't take your AK-47 out. You can't take your FN out. You can't take your HK out. You can't take this, that, or the other thing out because we came up with a classification that was designed by people who know nothing about anything.
Yeah.
Ignoramuses came up with rules. If I turned around...
They're about to do it again, man.
If I turned around and made a bunch of rules about how abortions should be performed without being a qualified physician, without being a qualified anything, and without having any stick in the game, and to turn around and say that the way I look at things should be the way it should be applied to a group of people, that it doesn't affect me in any way whatsoever, people would be screaming from the rooftops.
Yeah, you'd be laughed out of the room or they'd lose their minds.
But when it comes to firearms, as it comes to other things, and again, they break us down into little groups and they attack our passions, whether it's hunting, whether it's a certain type of firearms shooting, whether it's smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
You want to smoke marijuana, and you want to tell a human being, a free man or woman, that they cannot grow a weed in their backyard and dry it out and set fire to it, inhale the noxious substances. I'm not a weed fan in any way, shape, or form. But if you choose to inhale those substances that you grew in your backyard, it's a weed.
Yeah.
And you dried it out and you rolled it up and you smoked it. And the government shows up and is willing to put you in a locked box for a period of time because you did that thing. I look at you and I say, then you do not believe in freedom. You do not believe in the rights of liberty and of individualism and of humanity. And I have no time for it.
You know what?
It's not about firearms. It's about freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. I personally, I'm not a fan of marijuana, but I can tell you this: the very idea that they would throw people in boxes and toss people in jail while at the same time trying to tell people that they're legalizing it, right, is just a massive sign of the hypocrisy that's being demonstrated by this government and many others before it. But I mean, this one in particular. I'm seeing so many different things from this government that fly in the face of all reason. And you know what? It's become clearly evident to me that they'll do or say whatever works for them, whatever generates revenue for them, and at the same time and in the same breath, they will gladly throw people in jail for trying to do some of the same things themselves. So I mean, it really does kind of corroborate what you're saying, and it's funny to hear you say these things because I find myself agreeing with you on so many different levels. I mean, the idea that you might own an AK-47, which they tell you, by the way, that you can own legally. And you're licensed, you're certified, you can own it, you've owned it for decades, and then at some point the law changes. And now you're allowed to keep it, we'll let you keep it, right? But we're going to tell you that you're never allowed to leave the house with it again or use it the way it was meant to be enjoyed, which for me makes no sense. It's a completely malicious effort to damage the firearm community, to kind of keep those things hidden. I know a lot of people that would love to own AK-47s and HKs and Steyr AUGs, and I know people that do own them, and they're not allowed to take them out, ordinarily. And that to me just really doesn't sit well with me. And it's really an odd law for someone to kind of put that in place. I'm
a believer in freedom, and if you're gay and you want to be with another gay person and marry that person, then that is your right.
That's it. Absolutely, that's somebody else's business.
Right. And if you wish to smoke marijuana, then that is your business.
Yeah.
And if you wish to drink alcohol, then that is your business. If you wish to worship Yahweh, or you wish to worship Allah, or you wish to be a Sikh or a Hindu or anything else under the sun, that is your right and your freedom to do so, as long as you do not affect other people. And I understand that there is that especially when it comes to firearms, they're very dangerous. But the fact that people don't realize that far more people are menaced every day by, they get up for work in the morning and they get in their car with a coffee and they back out of the driveway and they pull down the road, and 50 yards down the road at 60 or 70 kilometers an hour, they look over at their phone and they pop open to Facebook or they check their texts, and they are menacing more people than all the AK-47 owners in Canada are doing at that time. And that happens tens of thousands of times a day in this country. And if I said to you, well, the only answer to that is we need to ban the private ownership of automobiles, you'd look at me like I was completely mentally handicapped. Yeah. Like I was completely out to lunch. And yet, this is where we're at.
Yep.
And this is a philosophical battle. The people who don't think that anyone should use force against anyone else don't want to see people owning firearms. And, you know, I understand there's a danger to the police, and I understand there's a danger to the general public. Of course there is. But there is. Every time someone drinks a bunch of beers and drives, or texts and gets in their car or their truck, or gets angry and grabs a knife, or gets angry and gets in their car and, you know, decides to speed down to their partner's work and have a big confrontation in public. These things, if you break the law and if you are menacing other people, then whether you have a knife or you have a gun or you have a hammer or you have your fists or you have a car is neither here nor there. You need to be held responsible for your actions. The firearms are completely irrelevant to the conversation, and I don't care what people say about Britain. The fact of the matter is, you can walk down the street in Detroit and be safer than walking down the street in London or in Manchester or in Glasgow. You're far more likely to be horribly attacked and brutally beaten in those cities than you are in Detroit or you are in Chicago. Where
poor Chicago. I feel bad for Chicago. Chicago's got some real issues.
You know, all these people who demonize the United States for firearms need to recognize there are 4 counties in the United States, 4, where 90% of the gun crime happens. Okay? Yep. So, if you take those places out of the equation, the United States is fine. They're fine.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that people don't recognize. The United States is unfairly demonized for a lot of things. And yes, there is gun crime in the United States. But the fact of the matter is, if you've never been there, go. Yeah. Because it's a lovely country to visit.
Absolutely.
And it's safe as anything. And Americans are lovely people. They're friendly and they're polite. And, you know, people may be wearing guns or they may not, but it's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is if you're not a drug dealer or you're not in a bad place where drugs are dealt, the chances are that you're not going to see any gun crime.
Yeah, and you know, and this brings me back to Canada. I mean, Canada is still one of the safest places in the world to live. I truly believe that.
Sure
and I think that it's going to continue to be that way. And it's not that I don't think that we have some gun laws that make a lot of sense.
Sure,
and certainly you touched on storage, and I'm really happy, you know, about certain things. I like to see a lot of things change. And you know, and I think that it's really important that we make it clear that, you know, the legitimate Canadian law-abiding firearm community is not the problem. And if you can kind of acknowledge that the criminal element and the legitimate firearm community are 2 completely different entities, and that we are not, you know, for whatever reason, we're definitely not the problem. You know, when you look at the cities and you look at the people that are committing crimes with firearms, you know, they're illegal guns, and so to continue to make legislation that affects, you know, the good people that own them. I have no problems with good people owning guns. In fact, I don't just endorse it. I would encourage it.
Well, look at Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Czechoslovakia was concerned about a problem with terrorism, and they said, well, we're going to put into our constitution the right of people to own firearms, and we're going to engender a whole series of laws that is going to safely implement regulations that allow law-abiding citizens to arm themselves
Yeah.
and to carry such arms
Yep.
in society as they see fit in order to protect themselves, their families, and our homeland.
Yeah, I'm digging
Wow.
some of these trends.
Like,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
What is the problem with that? Listen, in Canada, we could easily quadruple our firepower against the terrorists and the criminals by simply saying, listen, if you're a police officer, you can wear a firearm at all times, just like they do in the States.
Yeah.
So, you're a cop, you're off duty, you still wear your gun because you're still a peace officer. You're still a peace officer when you're not being paid and you're not on duty. So, all of a sudden, without it costing the country a dime, and without any effort, and without any extra training, and without any extra anything, we've doubled the number of firearms carried by
Good people.
assumed trustworthy people. And listen, you're out at the mall and some guy starts screaming shit and opens fire. You've got someone in that crowd who's off duty shopping with his wife who can respond. He's right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people say, oh my God, well, what are they going to do? Get in a firefight? Well, what do you think the police are going to do when they show up in uniform?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're going to get in a firefight.
Absolutely.
That's what they're going to do because that is what the war on crime and the war on terrorism looks like.
Yeah.
You don't get to have a war without fighting.
Yeah.
And if the fact of the matter is, if you don't want to fight, then give up.
Yeah.
And frankly, don't do it in my country. Pack your crap, get out, and go someplace that sucks.
Yeah.
Where they live like that. Like really, I don't care.
This.
Get out.
You know what? You know what? I gotta tell you, I love having these conversations with you. Right? That's why I insisted on having you on the show, Brian. I can't thank you enough for being here. Right? And throwing your 2 cents in the vault.
Thanks for having me,
Right?
Mark.
No, you know what? Fantastic time, and you know what? As always, right? I'm digging the time I spend with you. Thank you so much again.
We'll chat some more.
Absolutely,
My brother.
All right, take care.